The air in the manor's grand dining hall smelled of roasted meat and expensive wine. But all Kade Ramsey could smell was trouble as Lord Thornwick's hand rose high above his head, palm open, and aimed squarely at the Orc Maid who had accidentally spilled gravy on the nobleman's silk sleeve. "Not while I'm here," Kade said, his voice cutting through the tense silence as he stepped between them, his calloused farmhand's grip catching the Lord's wrist mid-swing. Lord Thornwick's face flushed crimson, his jowls quivering with indignation. "You dare lay hands on me? A common farmhand dares to interfere with how I discipline my own servants." Behind Kade, the Orc Maid stood frozen, her green skin pale with fear, her amber eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. She clutched the empty serving platter against her chest like a shield, her small tusks visible as her lips parted in shock. She could not have been more than 20 summers old, with black hair pulled back in a simple braid, and wearing the plain gray dress all the manor servants were required to wear. "Discipline is one thing, my lord," Kade said carefully, releasing the nobleman's wrist but not stepping aside. "But striking a girl who made an honest mistake is something else entirely. The gravy was hot, the platter was heavy, and these floors are slippery. It was an accident." "An accident from one of those green-skinned savages," Thornwick spat, straightening his wine-stained sleeve with sharp, angry movements. "They are barely civilized enough to work in a proper household, and you defend this creature. Perhaps you have spent too much time in the fields, Ramsey, and not enough time learning your place." Kade felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "My place is working the north fields that feed this entire estate, my lord. And my father fought alongside orc warriors in the border wars 20 years ago. He taught me that honor has nothing to do with the color of someone's skin." The dining hall had gone completely silent. The other guests, minor nobility from neighboring estates, watched with fascinated horror. The other servants, human and orc alike, had pressed themselves against the walls trying to become invisible. Lord Thornwick's eyes narrowed to slits. "Your father was a fool, and it seems the rot has spread to his son. You are dismissed from my service, Ramsey. Pack your belongings and be off my land by sunrise tomorrow." "That suits me fine," Kade replied, though his heart sank at the thought of losing his wages and the small cottage that came with his position. "But the girl comes with me." "What?" Thornwick's voice rose to a near shriek. "You have no authority to take my property anywhere." "She is not property, she is a person," Kade said firmly. "And if she stays here, you will beat her the moment I am gone. I will take her to the village, where she can find work that does not involve being struck for accidents." "She is bound to this household by a labor contract," Thornwick snapped. "If she leaves without fulfilling her term, I can have her arrested and thrown into the workhouse, where I assure you the treatment will be far worse than anything I might have done." Kade turned slightly, looking at the Orc Maid for the first time directly. Up close, he could see that her hands were trembling, that there were old bruises on her arms barely hidden by her sleeves, that she looked utterly terrified. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Brenna Grom," she whispered, her voice rough and low, the way most orcs spoke. "I have 6 months left on my contract." "How much would it cost to buy out her contract?" Kade asked, turning back to Thornwick. The Lord's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "More than a farmhand could earn in 5 years. 50 gold crowns." Kade's stomach dropped. He had perhaps 3 gold crowns to his name, saved carefully over years of work. But he saw the desperate hope flicker in Brenna's eyes, and he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I have a proposition," he said slowly. "My father left me land when he passed 3 years ago, 60 acres of good farmland in the valley with a stone house and a barn. It borders the river and has water rights. I will deed you that land in exchange for Brenna's freedom and enough gold to see us both through the winter." Thornwick's expression shifted from anger to calculating greed. Land was always valuable, especially land with water rights. 70 acres, you said. 60, Kade corrected. But it is prime land, and you know it. My father cleared it himself and built everything on it with his own hands. It is worth far more than 50 gold crowns. I would need to see the deed, verify the property lines, Thornwick said, but Kade could tell he was already agreeing in his mind. I can have it here by tomorrow morning, Kade said, along with the survey maps and the water rights documentation. Very well, Thornwick said after a long moment. But if you are trying to deceive me, Ramsey, I will see you both hanged for fraud. The girl will remain here tonight as insurance. You will return at dawn with the papers, and then you may have your precious savage. Kade wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Brenna leave with him immediately, but he knew he had pushed his luck as far as it would go. He turned to Brenna, meeting her amber eyes. I will be back at first light, he promised, and then you will be free of this place. She nodded slowly, and he thought he saw something shift in her expression, a tiny spark of hope or perhaps just confusion at why this human man would sacrifice so much for her. Kade left the manor and rode through the night to his small cottage, his mind racing. The land his father had left him had been his one security, his one hope for a future beyond being a hired hand. And he was about to give it all away for a girl he had just met, whose only connection to him was that they had both been on the receiving end of Lord Thornwick's cruelty. But as he pulled out the old leather folder containing the deed and all the property documents, he found he had no regrets. His father had taught him that a man's worth was measured not by what he owned, but by what he was willing to sacrifice for what was right. And leaving Brenna in that house, knowing she would be beaten or worse, was simply not something Kade could do. He spent the hours before dawn organizing the papers, making sure everything was in order. As the first gray light touched the eastern sky, he saddled his horse and rode back to the manor, the precious documents secure in his saddlebag. Lord Thornwick was waiting in his study, looking smug and well-rested. His solicitor was there as well, a thin man with spectacles who examined every document with excruciating care. Finally, after what felt like hours, the solicitor nodded. Everything appears to be in order, my lord. The land is as described, the water rights are legitimate, and the deed is properly recorded. If he signs it over to you, it will be a legal transfer. Excellent, Thornwick said, producing a purse of gold coins. 30 crowns, as we discussed, more than generous for taking a savage off my hands. Kade wanted to argue that they had not discussed any specific amount, but 30 crowns was enough to rent a small house and buy supplies for the winter. He signed the papers with a heavy heart, watching his father's legacy pass into the hands of a man who did not deserve it. Where is Brenna? He asked when the transaction was complete. In the servants' quarters, Thornwick said dismissively. Take her and go. And Ramsey, if I ever see you on my lands again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Kade found Brenna in a small, cramped room she shared with 3 other servants. She had already gathered her meager belongings into a cloth bundle. When she saw him, her whole face transformed with relief. You came back, she said softly. I gave you my word, Kade replied. Are you ready to leave? She nodded quickly, clutching her bundle. Together they walked through the manor, ignoring the stares of the other servants and the contemptuous glances of the nobles having their breakfast. When they finally stepped outside into the cool morning air, Brenna took a deep, shuddering breath as though she had been holding it the entire time. I have a horse, Kade said. The village is about 5 miles from here. We can find you a room at the inn and look for work for you there. "What about you?" Brenna asked as he helped her onto the horse behind him. "Where will you go? Lord Thornwick dismissed you as well." "I will figure something out," Kade said, though truthfully he had no idea. He had just given away his land, lost his job, and taken responsibility for another person. For the first time since his father's death, he felt completely unmoored. They rode in silence for a while, the horse plodding steadily along the road. Brenna's arms were wrapped loosely around his waist to keep her balance, and Kade was acutely aware of her presence behind him, of the trust she was placing in a stranger. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "Why did you give up everything for me? You do not even know me." Kade was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "My father used to tell me a story," he said eventually. "During the border wars, his unit was pinned down by enemy fire. They would have all died, but an orc warrior named Grommash charged the enemy position alone, drawing their fire so my father and his friends could escape. Grommash died saving them. My father never forgot that. He taught me that orcs are not monsters or savages. They are people, same as us. Good and bad, brave and cowardly, kind and cruel. When I saw Thornwick about to strike you, I saw that he was the monster, not you." Brenna was silent for so long that Kade thought perhaps he had offended her somehow. But then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "No one has ever stood up for me before, not even my own clan." "What happened to your clan?" Kade asked gently. "They cast me out," Brenna said bitterly. "I was caught helping human children who had gotten lost in the forest near our village. I led them safely back to their homes, and for this kindness, my clan called me a traitor. They said I had dishonored them by showing mercy to humans. So they exiled me, and I had no choice but to seek work in human lands. But humans see me as a monster, and orcs see me as a betrayer. I belong nowhere." "You belong wherever you choose to be," Kade said firmly, "and anyone who would exile you for saving children is not worth your loyalty." They reached the village by mid-morning. It was a small place, with perhaps 50 buildings clustered around a central square. There was an inn, a general store, a blacksmith, and various other shops and homes. Kade helped Brenna down from the horse and led her to the inn. The innkeeper, a round-faced woman named Marta, looked Brenna up and down with obvious suspicion. "We do not usually rent rooms to orcs," she said bluntly. "She is with me," Kade said. "She needs a room for a few weeks while she looks for work. I can pay." Marta's expression softened slightly when she saw the gold coins Kade placed on the counter. "1 week, paid in advance. After that we will see. And no trouble, you understand." "No trouble," Brenna promised quietly. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the village square. Brenna set her bundle on the bed and turned to Kade with an expression he could not quite read. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I need to find work myself," Kade admitted. "I cannot go back to Thornwick's estate, but there are other farms in the area that might need help. The harvest season is coming, so there should be opportunities." "You should not have to worry about work because you saved me," Brenna said, her amber eyes intense. "Let me help. I am strong, I can work hard. We can look for work together." Kade started to protest, to say that he did not expect anything from her, but the determined set of her jaw stopped him. "All right," he said. "We will look together." Over the next few days, they walked from farm to farm, asking about work. The responses were mixed. Some farmers slammed doors in their faces the moment they saw Brenna. Others were more polite but made it clear they would not hire an orc. A few were willing to offer Kade work, but refused to employ Brenna. It was frustrating and disheartening, but Kade refused to give up. Finally, on the 4th day, they arrived at a large farm owned by a grizzled old man named Marcus Thorn. He looked them both over with sharp blue eyes and then spat into the dirt. "You are Kade Ramsey, are you not? I knew your father. Good man. Shame what happened to him." "Yes, sir," Kade said. "We are looking for work. Any kind of work. We are both strong and willing." Marcus looked at Brenna with an unreadable expression. "I do not have any particular love for orcs," he said bluntly. "But I do not have any particular hate for them either. What I have is 200 acres of wheat that needs harvesting before the weather turns, and I am too old and too short-handed to do it myself. If you can work, I do not care what color your skin is." "We can work," Kade said quickly. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Marcus said. "I can offer room and board in the farmhand's quarters, plus wages at the end of the harvest. If you work out, maybe I will keep you on through the winter." It was the best offer they had received, and Kade accepted immediately. They returned to the inn to collect Brenna's things, and then moved into the simple but sturdy building that housed the farm's workers. There were 6 other farmhands, all human men, who eyed Brenna with varying degrees of suspicion and hostility, but said nothing in front of Marcus. The work was backbreaking. They woke before dawn and worked until sunset, cutting wheat with sickles, bundling it into sheaves and loading it onto wagons. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Kade's hands blistered and bled despite his calluses. But Brenna worked beside him without complaint, her orcish strength allowing her to keep pace with men twice her size. At night, they were too exhausted to do anything but eat and collapse into their beds. Kade slept in the men's section of the building, while Brenna had been given a small private room, little more than a closet, but it gave her privacy from the others. As the days turned into weeks, Kade began to notice things about Brenna. The way she hummed softly to herself while working, old orc songs in a language he did not understand. The way she always saved some of her dinner to leave out for the barn cats. The way her face lit up when she saw the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The way she was unfailingly kind to everyone, even the farmhands who treated her with contempt. He also noticed the way she moved, strong and graceful despite her size. The way the sun brought out golden undertones in her green skin. The way her smile, rare as it was, transformed her entire face. And he realized, with a mixture of surprise and concern, that he was developing feelings for her that went beyond friendship or simple compassion. It was a dangerous realization. Relationships between humans and orcs were not just taboo. They were often violently opposed by both species. He had heard stories of mixed couples being driven from their homes, attacked, even killed. And Brenna had already been exiled by her clan. He would not risk bringing more suffering into her life. But it was hard to ignore the way his heart lifted when he saw her each morning, or the way he found excuses to work near her in the fields, or the way he lay awake at night thinking about her. One evening, about a month into the harvest, Kade was walking back from the well with buckets of water when he heard raised voices from behind the barn. He set down the buckets and hurried around the corner to find 3 of the other farmhands confronting Brenna. "We do not want your kind here," one of them, a burly man named Garrett, was saying. "You are taking work from honest humans." "I am working the same as you," Brenna said quietly, but Kade could hear the tension in her voice. "I have done nothing to you. You exist," another man spat. "That is enough. Why Marcus hired a savage like you, I will never understand. Maybe she is warming the old man's bed," the third man suggested with a nasty laugh. "I hear orc women are animals in the sack." Kade saw red. He strode forward and shoved the man hard enough to send him stumbling backward. "Apologize to her," he demanded. "Right now." "Or what?" Garrett challenged, stepping forward with his fists raised. "You going to fight all 3 of us for this green-skinned whore?" If I have to, Kade said, though his mind was racing, trying to calculate his chances against 3 larger men. But before anyone could throw a punch, Marcus appeared, his walking stick in hand and his face thunderous. "What in the hell is going on here?" he barked. The 3 farmhands immediately backed down, mumbling excuses and avoiding eye contact. Marcus listened with a deepening scowl and then pointed his stick at them like a weapon. "I will make this very clear, exactly one time. Brenna Grom is employed on this farm same as you. She works harder than any 2 of you combined, complains less and causes no trouble. If I hear of any of you harassing her again, you will be off this farm so fast your heads will spin. Do I make myself clear?" The men nodded sullenly and slunk away. Marcus turned to Brenna and his expression softened slightly. "You all right, girl?" "Yes, sir," Brenna said. "Thank you." "Do not thank me for basic decency," Marcus grumbled. "Now both of you get some dinner before it gets cold." As they walked back to the main house, Brenna spoke quietly. "You did not have to do that. Stand up for me again, I mean. You have already done so much." "I will always stand up for you," Kade said before he could stop himself. "You deserve to be treated with respect." Brenna looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why are you so kind to me, Kade? Is it just because of your father's stories? Or is there something else?" Kade's heart pounded. This was his chance to tell her the truth, to admit his feelings, but fear held his tongue. Fear of rejection, fear of making her uncomfortable, fear of the consequences they would both face. "You are my friend," he said finally. "Friends look out for each other." Something flickered across Brenna's face, disappointment perhaps, but she nodded and said nothing more. The harvest continued. The days grew shorter and cooler as autumn deepened. Kade and Brenna fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in companionable silence. The other farmhands kept their distance after Marcus's warning, but Kade could feel their resentment simmering beneath the surface. One afternoon, they were working in a field far from the main house when storm clouds began to gather on the horizon. Marcus sent everyone back to shelter, but Kade and Brenna stayed to secure the wheat sheaves that had not yet been loaded onto the wagons. They worked quickly, racing against the approaching storm, but they were still a mile from the barn when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the rain had become a deluge. They abandoned the field and ran for the nearest shelter, an old stone storage shed that had been built decades ago and was now used mostly for keeping tools. They burst through the door, soaking wet and breathing hard, just as lightning split the sky. The shed was small and musty, filled with old barrels and farming implements. There was barely enough room for the 2 of them to stand without touching. Kade could hear Brenna's breathing, quick and shallow, and he realized she was shaking. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "I do not like storms," she admitted, her voice small. "When I was a child, lightning struck our village. 3 people died, including my younger brother." Without thinking, Kade pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed against him, her head resting on his chest. They stood like that as the storm raged outside, thunder shaking the walls and rain drumming on the roof. Kade was intensely aware of every point where their bodies touched. Her hair smelled like wheat and sunshine and something earthier, something uniquely her. He could feel the steady beat of her heart against his own chest. His hand moved almost of its own accord, stroking her back in slow, soothing circles. "Thank you," Brenna whispered, "for everything. For saving me from Thornwick, for standing up to those men, for being my friend. I do not know what I did to deserve your kindness, but I am grateful for it." "You do not have to thank me," Kade said softly. "I am the one who should be grateful. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working and surviving but not really living. You have reminded me what it means to care about someone, to fight for something beyond myself. Brenna pulled back slightly to look up at him, her amber eyes searching his face. Is that all I am to you? Someone to care about? Kade's breath caught. This was the moment. He could lie, maintain the safe distance between them, protect them both from the complications and dangers of what he really felt. Or he could tell the truth and risk everything. No, he said quietly. That is not all you are to me. Then what am I? Brenna asked, and there was something vulnerable and hopeful in her voice that made his heart ache. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep, Kade said, the words tumbling out now that he had started. You are the reason I look forward to each day, even when the work is brutal and exhausting. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. I think I am falling in love with you, Brenna. I think I have been since the moment I stepped between you and Thornwick's hand. Brenna's eyes filled with tears. You cannot love me, she whispered. I am an orc. You are human. Our peoples have been enemies for generations. If we tried to be together, we would be rejected by everyone, maybe even hurt. You have already sacrificed so much for me. I cannot let you sacrifice your whole future. My future is whatever I choose to make it, Kade said firmly. And I choose you if you will have me. I know it will not be easy. I know there will be people who hate us for it. But I would rather face that with you than spend my life pretending I do not feel what I feel. I feel it too, Brenna said, her voice breaking. I have tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or friendship, but it is more than that. So much more. I think about you constantly. I dream about you. When you smile at me, I feel like I can do anything. But I am so afraid, Kade. Afraid of what will happen to us. Afraid that I will ruin your life the way I ruined my own. You have not ruined anything, Kade said, cupping her face in his hands and wiping away her tears with his thumbs. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Kiss me, Brenna whispered. Please, I need to know this is real. Kade leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them unsure despite their confessions. But then Brenna's arms came up around his neck and she pulled him closer, deepening the kiss with a hunger that matched his own. Her tusks pressed lightly against his face, a reminder of their differences, but Kade did not care. All he cared about was the feeling of her in his arms, the taste of her lips, the rightness of this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the storm outside had begun to fade. Pale sunlight filtered through the cracks in the shed walls, painting everything in soft golden light. What do we do now? Brenna asked, her hand resting over his heart. We take it one day at a time, Kade said. We keep working, save our money, and when the harvest is over, we find a place of our own. Somewhere we can be together without fear. Somewhere we can build a life. You make it sound so simple, Brenna said with a small, sad smile. It will not be simple, Kade admitted. But it will be worth it. You are worth it. They stayed in the shed until the rain stopped completely, stealing a few more precious minutes of privacy before they had to return to the real world. When they finally emerged, hand in hand, the world looked freshly washed and new, as though the storm had cleansed away all the old hurts and prejudices. Kade knew that was not true, that the hatred and fear between their peoples ran deep and would not be washed away by a single storm. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to hope. The next few weeks were the happiest of Kade's life. He and Brenna were careful to keep their relationship quiet, knowing that revealing it publicly would only bring trouble. But they stole moments together whenever they could, meeting in the fields after the other workers had left, sitting together during meals, talking late into the night when everyone else was asleep. Kade learned more about Brenna's past, about the Orc clan she had grown up in and the traditions she had been raised with. She told him about Orc courtship rituals, about the songs and stories of her people, about the homeland far to the north that she had never seen but dreamed about. In turn, Kade told her about his father, about growing up on the farm, about his dreams of someday having land of his own again and raising a family. "Would your family accept me?" Brenna asked one night as they sat together on a fence rail, watching the stars come out. "If we had children together, I mean, would they be accepted by anyone?" "My father would have accepted you in a heartbeat," Kade said firmly. "He judged people by their character, not their species. As for children, I will not lie to you and say it would be easy for them. They would likely face prejudice from both sides, but they would be raised with love, and that counts for more than anything else." "You have thought about this," Brenna said softly, "about us having children." "I have thought about everything with you," Kade admitted. "I know it is too soon, we have only been together for a few weeks, but I cannot help it. When I think about my future, you are in every part of it." Brenna leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about it too, about having a home with you, about growing old together. It seems like an impossible dream, but you make me believe it could be real." The harvest was nearly complete when trouble found them again. Kade and Brenna were loading the last wagon of wheat when a group of riders appeared on the road. Kade's stomach dropped when he recognized Lord Thornwick at their head, along with several armed men. Marcus came out of the house to greet them, his expression wary. "Lord Thornwick, what brings you to my farm?" "I am looking for Kade Ramsey and the Orc girl he stole from me," Thornwick said coldly. "I have reason to believe they are working here." "Stole?" Marcus's eyebrows rose. "I was under the impression that Ramsey bought out her contract legally." "The land he deeded me was not his to give," Thornwick said, his voice dripping with false concern. "It seems there was a prior claim on the property, one that predates his father's ownership. The deed was therefore fraudulent and the contract is void. The Orc girl is still legally bound to my service, and Ramsey is guilty of fraud and theft." Kade felt ice run through his veins. It was a lie. It had to be. His father had owned that land free and clear for 30 years. But Thornwick had money and power, and if he had bribed the right officials, he could manufacture any documents he needed to support his claim. "That is not true," Kade said, stepping forward. "My father's deed was legitimate. You are lying because you are angry that I took Brenna away from you." "Careful, Farmhand," Thornwick said with a cold smile. "Accusations of fraud are serious business. I have the documents right here, certified by the county recorder. Your father never owned that land. He was merely a tenant, and when he died, the property reverted to its true owner, who has now sold it to me at a significant loss. You defrauded me of 50 gold crowns, and I want restitution." "I do not have 50 gold crowns," Kade said, his mind racing. "I spent it on food and lodging and the supplies we needed." "Then I will take the Orc girl as payment," Thornwick said. "She will serve out her original contract, plus an additional year to compensate me for the trouble you have caused." "No," Kade said flatly. "You are not taking her anywhere." Thornwick's smile widened. "I have 6 armed men with me, Ramsey. You are in no position to refuse. Now the girl can come willingly, or my men can take her by force. The choice is yours." Brenna stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I will go with you," she said quietly. "I will not let Kade suffer for my sake." "Like hell you will," Kade said, grabbing her arm. "I am not letting him take you back to that place." "You do not have a choice," Brenna said, and there were tears streaming down her face now. "He has the law on his side, and if you fight, he will have you arrested or killed. Please, Kade, please do not throw your life away for me." "I would rather die than let him hurt you again," Kade said fiercely. "How touching," Thornwick said, his voice mocking, but ultimately pointless. Men, take the orc. Two of the armed men dismounted and started toward Brenna. Kade moved to block them, his fists raised, but Marcus's voice cut through the tension. Wait. Everyone turned to look at the old farmer. Marcus was holding a shotgun, not aimed at anyone specifically, but resting casually in his arms in a way that made it clear he knew how to use it. I have been listening to this whole conversation, Marcus said calmly, and something does not sit right with me. You say there was a prior claim on Ramsey's land, a claim that predates his father's ownership. That would mean the original sale to his father was fraudulent, yes, precisely, Thornwick said, looking annoyed at the interruption. Then why did it take 3 months for this prior claim to surface? Marcus continued. And why did the supposed true owner wait until now to contest it? And why would they sell the property to you at a loss instead of pursuing legal action against the recorder's office that registered a fraudulent deed? Thornwick's face flushed. I do not have to explain myself to you, Thorn. No, but you do have to explain yourself to the magistrate, Marcus said, because I am invoking the farmer's right of appeal. Any dispute involving property ownership or labor contracts on farm land can be appealed to the county magistrate, and until that magistrate rules, no action can be taken. It is an old law, but it is still on the books. Thornwick looked furious. You are interfering in matters that do not concern you. These two have worked my harvest and eaten at my table, Marcus said. That makes it my concern. Now, you can take your armed thugs and ride to the magistrate's office to file your appeal, or you can try to take the girl by force and find out how good my aim still is. Your choice, Lord Thornwick. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thornwick yanked on his horse's reins with a curse. This is not over, Thorn. You have made a powerful enemy today. I have had worse enemies than you, Marcus said calmly. Now get off my land before I decide to test this shotgun's range. Thornwick and his men rode away, but Kade knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The magistrate would likely side with a wealthy nobleman over a farmhand and an orc. They had bought themselves time, nothing more. Thank you, Kade said to Marcus, his voice shaking. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, Marcus said, setting down the shotgun. I told you, I do not judge people by the color of their skin. You two have worked harder than anyone I have employed in years, and you have been honest with me. That is worth more than any amount of gold, but you need to understand, this is not over. Thornwick will take this to the magistrate, and unless you can prove your father's deed was legitimate, he will win. The deed was legitimate, Kade said desperately. I know it was. My father showed me all the paperwork when I was a boy. He was so proud of that land. Then you need to find proof, Marcus said. Original documents, witnesses to the sale, anything that can counter Thornwick's claim. You have maybe 2 weeks before the magistrate hearing. Use that time wisely. Over the next few days, Kade threw himself into the search for evidence. He rode back to the village where he had grown up and spoke to everyone who had known his father. Slowly, he began to piece together the story. His father, Kade Ramsey, had bought the land 30 years ago from a farmer named William Dorsey, who was retiring and moving to the coast. The sale had been witnessed by the village priest and recorded at the county office. But when Kade went to the county office to request copies of the original documents, he was told that there had been a fire 10 years ago that destroyed many of the older records. The deed he had given to Thornwick was a certified copy made after the fire, based on the tax records. It was the perfect opening for Thornwick to exploit. Without the original deed, Kade had no way to prove his father's ownership beyond doubt. And Thornwick had clearly bribed or threatened someone to create fake documents supporting a prior claim. Kade was beginning to despair when he remembered something his father had once mentioned. William Dorsey had had a daughter, a woman named Sarah who had moved away years ago. If Kade could find her and get her to testify that her father had sold the land legally to Kade Ramsey, it might be enough to counter Thornwick's fake documents. He spent 3 days tracking down Sarah Dorsey, now Sarah Wyndham, who was living in a town 2 days' ride to the east. When he finally found her, she was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, who listened to his story with growing anger. "My father sold that land fair and square to your father," she said firmly. "I was there when they signed the papers. And I will swear to it in front of any magistrate you want. Lord Thornwick is a liar and a cheat, and it is about time someone stood up to him." She agreed to travel back with Kade for the hearing, and they made the journey as quickly as they could. But when they arrived back at Marcus's farm, Kade found Brenna waiting for him with devastating news. "Thornwick came back," she said, her voice hollow. "He had a writ from the magistrate ordering me to return to his household until the hearing." Marcus tried to argue, but the magistrate's deputy said if I did not comply, I would be arrested for contempt. "I have to go back, Kade. I have to go back to that place." "No," Kade said, pulling her into his arms. "No, there has to be another way." "There is not," Brenna said, and she was crying now. "The law is clear. I have to go or they will arrest me, and then I will end up in the workhouse where things would be even worse. At least at Thornwick's manor I know what to expect." "I will not let him hurt you," Kade said desperately. "I will go with you. I will stay at the manor. I will watch over you every moment." "You cannot," Brenna said. "He has already said that if you set foot on his property, he will have you arrested for trespassing. We have to be apart just for a little while, just until the hearing. And then everything will be all right." But they both knew that was not necessarily true. Even if Kade won at the hearing, even if Sarah's testimony was enough to prove his father's deed was legitimate, it would not change the fact that they were an orc and a human trying to be together in a world that despised such unions. "I love you," Kade said, holding her tight. "No matter what happens, I love you, and I will fight for you until my last breath." "I love you too," Brenna whispered, "more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They kissed one last time, pouring all their fear and hope and desperation into it, and then the deputy came to take Brenna away. Kade watched her go, feeling like his heart was being ripped from his chest. The next 2 weeks were agony. Kade threw himself into preparing for the hearing, working with Sarah to document every detail of the original land sale. Marcus used his connections to hire a lawyer, a sharp young man named Thomas Bright, who specialized in property disputes. Together, they built what they hoped was an airtight case. But Kade's nights were tormented by worry about Brenna. He kept imagining her suffering at Thornwick's hands, being beaten or abused with no one to protect her. He considered storming the manor a dozen times, only to be talked down by Marcus's stern reminders that getting arrested would not help anyone. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The magistrate, a dour man named Harold Voss, listened as both sides presented their evidence. Thornwick's lawyer produced impressive-looking documents claiming that the land had originally been owned by a minor nobleman named Lord Ashford, who had never authorized its sale. According to these documents, Kade Ramsey had bought the land from William Dorsey, who had been a tenant rather than an owner, making the entire transaction void. Then Thomas Bright stood and called Sarah Wyndham to testify. She described in clear, unwavering detail how her father had owned the land free and clear, how he had shown her the original deed granted to him by the Crown 40 years ago, how he had sold it to Kade Ramsey in a legal transaction witnessed by the village priest. Where is this original deed now? Thornwick's lawyer challenged. If it existed, surely it should be in the county records. It was, Sarah said sharply, until the fire destroyed those records. But I saw it with my own eyes, and I am willing to swear under oath that my father owned that land and had every right to sell it. The hearing went on for hours, with both sides arguing back and forth. Finally, Magistrate Voss held up his hand for silence. I have heard enough, he said. Lord Thornwick, your documents are certainly impressive, but they lack proper provenance. You claim Lord Ashford was the original owner, yet you cannot produce any record of his purchase or any explanation of why he never paid taxes on the property or took action when it was sold by another party. Mrs. Wyndham's testimony, on the other hand, is credible and specific. I find in favor of Kade Ramsey. The land sale to his father was legitimate, the deed he gave to Lord Thornwick is valid, and the contract for the Orc girl's freedom is likewise valid. She is released from any further obligation to Lord Thornwick's household. Kade felt a wave of relief so intense it almost knocked him off his feet. He had won. Brenna was free, but Thornwick was not done. He stood, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage. You are taking the word of some old woman over properly certified documents. I demand an appeal to the High Court. You may file whatever appeals you wish, Magistrate Voss said coldly. But until and unless a higher court overturns my ruling, my decision stands. Now, I believe you have an Orc servant who needs to be released from your custody immediately. Thornwick looked like he wanted to argue further, but the magistrate's stern expression convinced him to hold his tongue. He stalked out of the courthouse, his lawyer hurrying after him. Kade rushed to Thornwick's manor with Thomas and Marcus. They found Brenna in the servants' quarters, her face bruised and her hands bandaged. Kade's vision went red with rage. What did he do to you? He demanded. It does not matter, Brenna said, though her voice shook. It is over now. He cannot hurt me any more. The hell it does not matter, Kade said. He beat you, I will kill him. No, you will not, Marcus said firmly, grabbing Kade's shoulder. What you will do is take Brenna and leave this place. Revenge can wait, her safety cannot. Marcus was right, and Kade knew it. He helped Brenna gather her belongings, which took only moments since she had so little, and then they left Thornwick's manor forever. Back at Marcus's farm, they tended to Brenna's injuries and celebrated their victory. But Kade knew that this was only the beginning. They had won the legal battle, but they still faced the larger question of where they would go and how they would live. Stay here, Marcus said that evening as they all sat around the dinner table. I am an old man, and this farm is too much for me to manage alone. Stay and work the land, and when I die, it will pass to you. You have earned it. It was an incredibly generous offer, and Kade was tempted to accept, but he saw the hesitation in Brenna's eyes and understood her concern. This village, this area, was too close to Thornwick's influence. They would never truly be free here. Thank you, Kade said. But I think we need to make a fresh start somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows us, where we can just be Kade and Brenna, not the human and the orc who defied convention. I understand, Marcus said. But the offer stands, if you ever change your mind. Over the next few weeks, Kade and Brenna made their plans. They had saved enough money from the harvest to buy supplies and travel to the frontier lands far to the west, where settlers were still carving out farms from the wilderness. It was a hard life, but it was also a place where people were judged more by their ability to survive than by the color of their skin. They bought a wagon, 2 horses, seeds, tools, and everything else they would need to start a farm. On the day they were set to leave, the entire village turned out to see them off. Some faces were hostile, but many more were curious or even supportive. Word of their story had spread, and while some saw them as an abomination, Others saw them as romantic rebels defying unjust prejudices. Sarah Wyndham was there, and she hugged Kade tightly. "Your father would be proud of you," she said. "Not just for winning that case, but for having the courage to follow your heart." Marcus handed Kade a leather pouch heavy with coins. "Your wages from the harvest, plus a little extra. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better, to be repaid when you get your farm established." "I will repay you," Kade promised. "Every copper." "I know you will," Marcus said. "Now go before I start getting sentimental in my old age." Kade and Brenna climbed onto the wagon and started down the road. They looked back once to wave at the small crowd, and then they turned their faces west toward the future. The journey took 3 weeks. They traveled through forests and over mountains, following rough trails that were barely more than paths. Some nights they stayed at inns in the small frontier towns, and some nights they camped under the stars. Slowly, they left civilization behind and entered the true wilderness. It was during this journey that Kade and Brenna truly became a couple in every sense. They talked for hours about their dreams and fears, their hopes for the future. They shared stories from their childhoods, learning about each other's cultures and traditions. And at night, in the privacy of their tent, they made love with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. "I never knew it could be like this," Brenna said one night as they lay tangled together under the blankets. In Orc culture, relationships are often arranged by the clan elders based on strength and compatibility. Love is seen as a pleasant bonus, not a requirement. But this, what we have, is so much more than I ever imagined. "I never thought I would find someone who understood me the way you do," Kade said, stroking her hair. "Someone who saw the world the same way, who wanted the same things. You are my home, Brenna. Wherever we end up, as long as you are there, it will be home." They finally reached their destination, a valley in the foothills where the land agency was still offering parcels to settlers willing to work them. Kade used some of their money to claim 100 acres of land, with a stream running through it. The land was heavily forested and completely untamed, but Kade saw its potential, and more importantly, Brenna did too. "It is perfect," she said, looking out over the trees and the mountains in the distance. "We can build our home here. We can be happy here." They spent the first few weeks clearing a space for a cabin and a garden. The work was brutal, cutting down trees and pulling stumps, but they worked together with a determination born of hope. Slowly, a structure began to take shape. It was rough and simple, just one room with a fireplace and a loft for sleeping, but it was theirs. Other settlers began to arrive in the valley, drawn by the same promise of land and freedom. Some were humans, some were orcs, and some were other races entirely. This was the frontier, where old prejudices mattered less than the ability to work and survive. Kade and Brenna were not the only mixed couple in the area, though they were still rare enough to draw stares. They made friends with their nearest neighbors, a human couple named James and Ellen Roth, who had a farm about 2 miles to the south. James was a veteran of the border wars like Kade's father, and he treated Brenna with the same respect he would any human woman. "Fought beside too many orcs to buy into the bigotry," he said bluntly. "My best friend during the war was an orc named Gramash. Saved my life twice." Kade froze. "Gramash? He saved my father's life too. In fact, he died saving my father's unit." James's eyes widened. "Your father was Kade Ramsey. I will be damned. I served in the same unit. Kieran was a good man. I was sorry to hear he passed." It was a strange and wonderful coincidence, and it cemented the friendship between the two families. James and Ellen helped Kade and Brenna with their farm, teaching them the skills they needed to survive on the frontier. In return, Kade and Brenna helped with their harvests and repairs. As summer turned to autumn and then to winter, Kade and Brenna settled into a rhythm. They worked their land during the day, clearing more fields and planting winter wheat. They spent their evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. And at night, they held each other close, grateful for every moment they had together. One cold evening in late winter, as snow fell softly outside their cabin, Brenna told Kade she was pregnant. He was stunned speechless for a moment, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, still hardly able to believe it. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Brenna asked, though she was smiling through tears. "Happy does not even begin to describe it," Kade said, setting her down carefully as though she were made of glass. "I am terrified and excited and grateful all at once. This is everything I have ever wanted." They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Kade built a cradle from pine wood and sanded it until it was smooth as silk. Brenna sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her strong hands surprisingly delicate with needle and thread. Ellen came over often to give advice and share hand-me-down baby items from when her own children were small. There were challenges, of course. Brenna's pregnancy was difficult, and there were times when she was sick or in pain. Kade worried constantly, knowing that they were miles from any proper doctor or midwife. But Ellen had delivered plenty of babies in her time, and she promised to be there when Brenna went into labor. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and the promise of new life. Kade worked longer hours, determined to have enough food stored and enough fields planted to support his growing family. Brenna helped as much as she could, though Kade tried to get her to rest more. "I am pregnant, not helpless," she would say whenever he fussed too much. "Orc women work right up until they give birth. It is our way." "Your way is going to give me gray hairs," Kade would reply, but he learned to let her do what she felt capable of, trusting her to know her own limits. One warm afternoon in late spring, Brenna's labor began. Kade sent word to Ellen, who arrived within the hour. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Kade stayed by Brenna's side the entire time, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their daughter was born. She came into the world with a lusty cry, her skin a pale green shade somewhere between her mother's deep emerald and her father's tan, her eyes a startling blue. She had tiny bumps where tusks would eventually grow and ears that were slightly pointed but not as pronounced as her mother's. "She is perfect," Brenna whispered, cradling the baby to her chest. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name her?" Kade asked, running a gentle finger over his daughter's downy black hair. "In Orc tradition, the mother names the daughters," Brenna said. "I would like to name her Kira after my grandmother. She was the kindest person I ever knew before I met you." "Kade Ramsey," Kade said, testing the name. "It is beautiful, perfect for her." As he looked at his wife and daughter, Kade felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. All the struggles, all the sacrifices, all the pain, it had all been worth it to reach this moment. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Kade and Brenna worked their farm, raised their daughter, and built a life together. Kira grew up strong and healthy, a happy child who was equally comfortable with her human and Orc heritage. She learned Orc songs and stories from her mother and human traditions from her father. The other children in the valley accepted her without question, and the adults followed their lead. When Kira was 3, Brenna gave birth to a son they named Kieran after Kade's father. He had his mother's green skin and his father's gray eyes, and from the moment he was born, he was the most curious child Kade had ever seen, always getting into things and exploring. The farm prospered. Each year they cleared more land, planted more crops, and raised more livestock. They built additions onto the cabin until it was a proper house, with separate rooms for the children and a large kitchen where Brenna could cook the meals that blended both human and orc cuisines. Word of their success spread, and more mixed couples began to settle in the valley. It became known as a place where anyone could make a fresh start, where old prejudices held no power. Kade and Brenna found themselves at the center of a small but growing community that valued hard work and mutual respect over the color of someone's skin. One autumn day, about 5 years after they had first arrived in the valley, a rider came to their farm. Kade was immediately wary, remembering the last time an unexpected visitor had brought trouble. But his fears faded when he recognized the rider as one of the young men from the land agency office. "Message for Kade Ramsey," the rider said, handing over a sealed letter. Kade opened it with trembling hands, fearing bad news. But as he read, his expression shifted from worry to shock to something like wonder. "What is it?" Brenna asked, coming to stand beside him. "It is from Marcus," Kade said slowly. "Marcus Thorn, the farmer we worked for. He says he has passed away and left his entire farm to us in his will. 300 acres, the house, all the equipment, everything. He says we earned it, and he wanted to make sure we would always have a home to return to if we needed one." Brenna's eyes filled with tears. "He was a good man." "He was," Kade agreed, "but we do not need his farm. We have our own home here, our own land. And I think I know who would benefit from it more than us." Over the next few weeks, Kade made arrangements to deed Marcus's farm to Sarah Wyndham's grandson, a young man who had recently married and was struggling to find land he could afford. It felt right to pass on Marcus's generosity to someone who needed it, to continue the cycle of kindness that had saved both Kade and Brenna. As the years passed, Kade and Brenna watched their children grow. Kira became a skilled hunter and tracker, able to move through the forest as silently as a shadow. Kieran showed a talent for working with animals and spent hours training their horses and dogs. They were happy, healthy children who knew they were loved. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Kade would think back to that day in Lord Thornwick's manor, when he had stepped between a cruel man's hand and a frightened orc girl. It had been the most important decision of his life, the moment that set everything else in motion. He had given up his father's land, his job, his security, all for a stranger, and in return he had gained everything that truly mattered. "You ever regret it?" Brenna asked him once as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Giving up your father's land for me?" "Not for a single second," Kade said, pulling her close. "That land was just dirt and grass. You and our children and this life we have built together, that is real wealth. That is what my father would have wanted for me." "I love you," Brenna said softly. "I loved you from that first moment when you stood up for me even though it cost you everything. I knew then that you were different, that you were special, and every day since has only proven that more true." "I love you too," Kade said, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. 1,000 times over I would choose you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing over some game they were playing. The fields around them were full of healthy crops, the barn was stocked with livestock, and their neighbors were good people who had become like family. It was a simple life, but it was a good one. It was everything they had fought for and everything they deserved. And as Kade held his wife close and listened to their children's laughter, he knew that he was the luckiest man in the world. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and challenges. There was the spring when the river flooded and nearly destroyed their fields, but the whole community came together to rebuild. There was the winter when Kieran fell through the ice on the pond, and Kira dove in to save him, both of them ending up sick for weeks while Kade and Brenna nursed them back to health. There was the summer when a forest fire threatened the valley, and everyone fought together to create fire breaks and protect their homes. Through it all, Kade and Brenna remained each other's constant support. They had arguments, of course, usually about small things like how much freedom to give the children or whether to buy new equipment or make do with repairs. But they always worked through their disagreements with respect and love, never letting anger fester. When Kira was 15, she asked her parents about the day they met. She had heard pieces of the story over the years, but she wanted to know everything. So one evening, Kade and Brenna sat their children down and told them the whole tale, from the moment in Lord Thornwick's dining hall to their journey west and the building of their farm. "So you gave up everything for Mother?" Kira asked her father, her blue eyes wide. "Just like that, without even knowing if she would want to be with you." "I did not do it expecting anything in return," Kade said honestly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Your mother was a person who needed help, and I was in a position to give it. Everything that came after, our love and our life together, that was a gift I never expected. Father stood between me and a man who wanted to hurt me," Brenna added, taking Kade's hand. "He protected me when no one else would. That kind of courage and kindness is rare, and I knew immediately that he was someone special." "Do people still treat mixed couples badly?" Kieran asked quietly. "Like, if Kira or I fell in love with someone, would people hate us for it?" It was a question Kade had been dreading but knew would come eventually. "Some people would," he said honestly. "There are still those who believe humans and orcs should not mix on both sides. But there are also more and more people who do not care, who judge relationships by the love between the people rather than their species. The world is changing, slowly but surely, and families like ours are part of that change. We have never regretted our choice," Brenna said firmly. "But we also will not pretend it has always been easy. You will both face challenges because of your mixed heritage. Some will see you as not fully human, others as not fully orc. But you are exactly who you are supposed to be, and anyone who cannot accept that is not worth your time." "I think it is romantic," Kira declared. "Father saving Mother like a hero from the old stories. I hope I find someone who would sacrifice everything for me someday." "I hope you find someone who treats you with respect and kindness every day," Kade corrected gently. "Grand gestures are nice, but it is the small, daily acts of love that really matter." As the children grew into young adults, Kade and Brenna watched with pride as they made their own choices. Kira fell in love with a human boy from a neighboring farm, and after a year of courtship, they married in a ceremony that blended human and orc traditions. Kieran took longer to settle down, spending several years traveling and exploring the frontier, before finally returning home with an orc woman he had met on his journeys. Kade and Brenna became grandparents, and the cycle continued. Their grandchildren were even more mixed than their children, some looking mostly human, some mostly orc, and some a perfect blend of both. But they were all loved, all accepted, all part of the growing community in the valley that had become known for its tolerance and diversity. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kade took Brenna on a journey back east. They visited the village where they had first worked together, Marcus's farm now thriving under new ownership. They visited Sarah Wyndham's grave, paying respects to the woman who had helped save them. And they stood on the land that had once belonged to Kade's father, now part of Lord Thornwick's holdings. Thornwick himself was long dead, having passed away a few years after their trial. His children had sold off most of the estate, and the manor had fallen into disrepair. It was a reminder that wealth and power meant nothing in the end, that the only things that lasted were the relationships you built and the love you shared. "You ever wish we had kept this land?" Brenna asked as they stood looking out over the fields Kade's father had once tilled. "No," Kade said without hesitation. "This land was my father's dream, not mine. My dream was always to build something of my own with someone I loved, and that is exactly what we did." They returned home to find their children had organized a surprise celebration for their anniversary. The entire valley had turned out, bringing food and music and well wishes. As Kade and Brenna danced under the stars, surrounded by their family and friends, Kade thought about the path that had led them here. It had started with a single decision, a moment when he had chosen to do the right thing despite the cost. And that decision had rippled outward, affecting not just him and Brenna but their children, their grandchildren, and the entire community they had helped build. It was proof that one person standing up for what was right could change the world, or at least change their corner of it. As the celebration wound down and the guests began to head home, Kade and Brenna stood together on their porch, just as they had done countless times over the years. The house behind them was full of sleeping grandchildren. Their own children were chatting quietly in the kitchen, and the land around them was peaceful and prosperous. "We did well," Brenna said softly, leaning her head on Kade's shoulder. "Look at everything we built from that one moment of courage." "We did better than well," Kade said, kissing the top of her head. "We built a life worth living, raised children who are good and kind, and helped create a place where everyone is welcome. I could not have asked for more." "Do you remember what you said to Lord Thornwick that day?" Brenna asked. "When he was about to strike me." "Not while I am here," Kade said. "I remember." "Those words changed my life," Brenna said. "They gave me hope when I had none. They showed me that there were still good people in the world. And they led me to you." "They changed my life too," Kade said. "Because after I said them, I could never go back to being the person I was before. I had to become the man who would stand by those words, who would protect you and fight for you and build a life with you. You made me better, Brenna. You made me the person I always wanted to be." They stood in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence after so many years together. Finally, Brenna spoke again. "I want you to know that if I had to do it all over again, even knowing how hard it would be, I would not change a thing. Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of fear or pain, it was all worth it for this. For you, for our family, for this life we have built together." "Same here," Kade said, his voice thick with emotion. "I gave up land and security and an easy life, but I gained everything that truly matters. I gained you, and that was the best trade I ever made." As they finally went inside to bed, surrounded by the sounds of their family sleeping peacefully under their roof, Kade felt a deep sense of contentment. He had lived a good life, a life of purpose and meaning. He had stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. He had raised children and helped build a community, and he had done it all with Brenna by his side. The farmhand who had once stepped between a lord and an orc maid had become so much more. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather, a friend, and a leader in his community. But at his core, he was still that same man who had said, "Not while I am here," and meant it with every fiber of his being. And as he drifted off to sleep with his wife in his arms, Kade knew that if he had to do it all again, if he had to make that same choice in that same moment, he would not hesitate for a second. Because some things were worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth building a whole life around. Love was one of those things. Justice was one of those things. And the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it cost you everything, was the most important thing of all. Their story became legend in the valley, passed down through generations as an example of how one moment of courage could change everything. Young couples, both mixed and not, would come to visit Kade and Brenna in their later years, asking for advice and wisdom. And Kade would always tell them the same thing. Love is a choice you make every day, not just once. I chose to protect Brenna that first day, but I also chose to love her every day after. In the good times and the bad, in the moments of joy and the moments of struggle, I chose her. And she chose me. That is what makes a relationship last, not some grand romantic gesture, but the daily decision to be there for each other. Brenna would usually add her own wisdom. Do not let others define who you can love or what you can be. We faced so much prejudice and hatred, but we never let it change how we felt about each other. We built our own path, created our own family, and made our own rules. And we were happy because we were true to ourselves and to each other. As Kade and Brenna grew older, their bodies slowed, but their love never diminished. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good morning and good night, still looked at each other with the same affection and desire they had felt in their youth. Their grandchildren would sometimes roll their eyes at the older couple's displays of affection, but secretly, they all hoped to find love like that someday. When Kade was 72 and Brenna was 70, they took one last journey together. They traveled back to the place where their cabin had first stood, now surrounded by mature fields and orchards. They walked hand in hand through the land they had cleared together, remembering the early days of their marriage when everything was new and uncertain. "We built something good here," Kade said, looking out over the valley that now held dozens of farms and families. "Something that will outlast us." "The best things always do," Brenna said. "Our love, our family, the community we helped create, these will go on long after we are gone. We planted seeds that will bear fruit for generations." They sat together under an old oak tree, the same tree where they had rested during those first exhausting days of clearing the land. Kade pulled out a small wooden box he had been carrying. "I made something for you," he said, opening it to reveal a necklace. The pendant was carved from a single piece of oak wood, shaped into two hands clasped together, one clearly human and one clearly orc. "I wanted you to have something to remember me by when I am gone." "Kade," Brenna said, tears in her eyes. "It is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Kade said, fastening it around her neck. "I wanted to capture the moment we first held hands, that first time you trusted me enough to let me touch you. That was when I knew we would be all right, when I felt your hand in mine and knew we were in this together." "I trust you still," Brenna said, lacing her fingers through his. "With my life, with my heart, with everything I am." They sat like that for hours, watching the sun move across the sky, content in each other's presence. When they finally stood to leave, they did so slowly, their bodies stiff from age but their spirits as strong as ever. Kade lived to be 78 years old. He passed away peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, with Brenna beside him and his children and grandchildren nearby. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to his wife, and his last expression was a smile. Brenna mourned him deeply, but she did not let grief consume her. She knew that Kade would want her to keep living, to keep being part of their family and community. She wore his necklace every day and told stories about him to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see 2 of her great-grandchildren born and to know that the family line would continue. When she finally passed, it was with the same peacefulness that Kade had shown, surrounded by love and with no regrets. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their farm, under a marker that reads simply, "Kade and Brenna Ramsey together forever." And though their bodies were gone, their legacy lived on in every mixed couple who found courage from their story, in every person who stood up against injustice, in every child who was taught that love transcends differences. The farmhand who had said, "Not while I am here," and the orc maid he had protected, had become something greater than themselves. They had become a symbol of hope, proof that love could overcome hatred, that courage could change destinies, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply stand up for what was right. And in the valley they had helped settle, in the community they had helped build, their story was told and retold, generation after generation. A reminder that every person has the power to make a difference, to change a life, to build something beautiful from a single moment of courage and compassion.